Hello, folks. It's great to see you this morning. Thank you so much for being here. My name is Nicole Sting. I use she, her pronouns. I serve as Strategic Initiatives and Relations Manager for the Department of Housing Services. We're so grateful to have incredible guests today in the room and great program for you all as we think about the needs of housing in Washington County. Before we dive into that program, though, I have a few quick housekeeping matters. First, you've likely noticed we have food, coffee, very important coffee and tea at the table there. Please help yourself throughout the program. We've seen folks visiting our staff tabling. If you have a moment, you want to see some of the work of the department, help yourself over that way. Staff, if you want to just wave and say hi, they're members of our strategic initiatives team, our real estate teams, our rental assistance team, and our program implementation team. So we're grateful to have them here to share some of this experience. We'll be talking at a high level, and they'll help you get into the weeds of our work. Additionally, if you haven't already, the restrooms are just around the corner there. If you need them at any time, excuse yourself. No need to raise your hand and ask for permission. And additionally, you'll notice we have CPTV here. Hello to our CPTV audience. We also have photographers walking around the room. We want to make sure you know this event is recorded and photographed. And additionally, you'll notice a few flyers on your table. Unsurprisingly, we're busy in the Department of Housing Services, and we want your help getting the word out about a few key things. First, very exciting, we'll be opening a housing waitlist November 4th. So we'd love your help getting the word out. We have flyers in English and Spanish at the table. If you need flyers in additional languages, reach out to the department. We're happy to help and make sure that folks have access to this important waitlist. Additionally, the department is working on updating our supportive housing services local implementation plan. We have a survey and an upcoming public hearing we wanted to make you aware of as well. And the majority of our time here today will be focused on the changing housing landscape, and of course that impacts what's happening at the federal level. We have a one-pager on the table of what those impacts are here on day 30 of a government shutdown, so we encourage you to look that over, reach out to staff if you have questions, and we'll certainly be digging more into that as we go. And with housekeeping complete, I'm honored to introduce our director, Molly Rogers, to give some welcoming remarks. Thank you.
Good morning, everyone. Woo! I am honored to be here hosting my third housing forum, my new favorite tradition. And we just keep evolving our program, so thank you to our fabulous team. And just looking around this room, I can see that we have more than doubled than when I first started 2 years ago. And I think of that as really commensurate with the more than doubling of the impact we're making in this community with all of you in partnering with us. And with partners like you, I am proud to share that we supported over 20,700 people just last year, which is like the population of Sherwood. But before we get into our program, it is important to remember why we are here. And it all starts with home. While the county we serve has been here since 1843, the residents who call it home go much farther than that. And so I want to first acknowledge the people on whose land we live and whose land we gather on today, the Atfaluti Kalapunians, also known as the Tualatin Band of Kalapunians, the first inhabitants of Washington County. We are grateful for the land we are on, Kalapunian land. Signers of the Willamette Valley Treaty of 1855 were removed from their homelands to the Grand Ronde Indian Reservation. Today, their descendants are tribal members of Grand Ronde and Celeste tribes, carrying on the traditions and cultures of their ancestors. We acknowledge and express gratitude for the ancestors of this place and recognize that we are here because of the sacrifices forced upon them. In remembering these communities, we honor their legacy, their lives, and their continuation in this community. Please reflect on the role government has played in this painful colonial history, and reflect on the resilience and healing of the indigenous land and communities. We would also like to invite everyone to collaborate and work together with the tribes to take care of the land and water and the people who inhabit these spaces. And in housing, this could not echo more true. Today, we will reflect on the ways government and our partners can collectively create a Washington County where everyone has an affordable home and the supports that each of us need to thrive. Collaboration is key to that effort, which is what makes our community stronger. I'd like to take a moment to recognize everyone who came today. In particular, I would like to start in recognizing the elected leaders in this room. So please stand or wave if you're comfortable. First, the entire board of Washington Commissioners are in the house. Woo! We are also joined by the esteemed state leaders setting policy in Salem. Just a quick show. Thank you. Next, our mayors and city councilors, please stand or give a wave. You are important partners in this work. And of course, our service district representatives. Great. Thank you so much for taking the time to be with us today. We're also joined by our advisory bodies, the volunteer members who dedicate their time to make us better. As you feel comfortable, please stand or wave if you serve on our Housing Advisory Committee, our Homelessness Solutions Advisory Council, Resident Advisory Board, Lived Experience Advisory Committees, or other bodies. Woo! As I look across this room, I see colleagues and thought leaders in our housing work, especially our keynote speaker and esteemed panel of housing leaders. I'll get to that in just a moment. And I'm really proud of the power of this room and the power of community, because, my friends, we need our community more than ever. So just looking back and reflecting a little bit in time, in 2018, our region passed a landmark housing bond that generated $652 million and is on track to create an estimated 5,600 affordable homes, which is 1,700 more than its original goal across the region. And I'm proud to say that the Housing Authority of Washington County has invested in 12 new affordable communities with 958 apartment homes, exceeding our local goal of 814. And these were often done in partnership with other affordable housing providers, like some of you in this room today. Quick shout out to our friend Rachel Duke of the Community Partners of Affordable Housing, who have been serving this community for as long as I can remember. Rachel, thank you. As well as BNSR, Nathan Teskey in this room serving our going to be part of our housing panel too, and many, many more. And then in 2020, voters in our community passed the Supportive Housing Services Measure, providing resources to address homelessness across the region. In Washington County, the SHS measure allowed us to build a homeless services system of care nearly from scratch. We went from having zero, I'm going to repeat, zero overnight beds for single adults, to now a shelter system of 400+ shelter beds and units year-round. And these crucial resources must be sustained so that we can keep the 1,670 formerly homeless households permanently housed through these resources. And not to mention, we need to continue preventing homelessness. People should not have to go through the homeless system if they don't have to. And we have done that for over 3,800 families already. And although counts of homelessness are up for those who are experiencing sheltered homelessness, we have held steady for those experiencing unsheltered homelessness in Washington County. We've done all this work while also completing renovations of 592 homes in 10 communities in just 3 years as part of our Affordable Housing Preservation Portfolio project. And we're about to open up a new waitlist approach for project-based Section 8 units to more efficiently serve families and properties alike across the county. But all in 1 year, our tides seem to have turned. The Metro Affordable Housing Bond dollars are nearly fully committed. The forecasted revenue for SHS measure has leveled out and lowered than anticipated last year. And the state legislature has fewer resources than they had in previous years. And today we find ourselves in a federal shutdown at day 30. Ivory Matthews and I were at Washington, D.C. last week, hearing from other housing authority leaders who have experienced cash reserves being swept by HUD, shortfalls like they've never seen before, and terminations of rental assistance programs without clear alternatives. But really the meaningful part of that time was the ripples of hope, stories, which were the most poignant. Housing authorities stepping up and doing whatever is needed for their communities, like hotel acquisitions for chronically homeless individuals, creating first-time homeowners, and establishing new local rent assistance programs to provide immediate safety off the streets. And that's just exactly what we've done here in Washington County. As housers, it is our job to keep showing up every day because thousands of people depend on us. And we are truly in uncharted waters. So the conversations we will have today will be key to our collective approach in navigating the changing landscape we see. We are likely to see the longest government shutdown in our country's history, with just 1 week looming to that deadline. And the benefits people rely on are at risk if this shutdown extends into December. As a housing authority, our ability to make rent checks in December is unknown. And more than 3,700 households in Washington County depend on federal assistance for housing and shelter. Families from Banks to Beaverton to Tigard and across the county will be at risk. This risk is deeply concerning, first and foremost, because of the impact to those families, but also to the almost 1,500 landlords who rely on county rental assistance vouchers to help their properties pencil. Before the shutdown, we already saw the impact of this new federal administration. The Life-Saving Emergency Housing Voucher Program was stood up during the pandemic to support 70,000 families in ending or preventing homelessness across the country. And now, because of this administration, this program will end 4 years earlier, risking 79 households with 84 children. in Washington County who could face homelessness again. Now, more than 750,000 Oregonians are staring down the possibility of where they may not have enough food when SNAP benefits run out on Sunday. So how do we navigate through all this? How do we ensure our county's residents continue to have access to these crucial resources and to expand on them for those who do not have them now? How do we respond to the very fears, anxieties that are growing in our community? This morning, we will explore how we can navigate through these rapidly shifting housing landscape. We've gathered leaders from across the state to help us understand the moment we are in and to give us ideas and strategies to navigate it. So I'm really, really excited to hear from and learn from our guests this morning. And our very first is Representative Pam Marsh of Oregon's District 5 in Jackson County. Representative Marsh is the chair of the House Committee on Housing and Homelessness and a longtime advocate for the needs of our most vulnerable community members. She's known in Salem for her hard work, compassion, and pragmatic approach. Representative Marsh has led key housing initiatives, ranging from protecting manufactured home park residents to housing recovery from the devastating 2020 Labor Day fires. And most recently, her work on senior housing has unlocked new resources to keep seniors stably housed. Representative Marsh, I personally admired your steadfast commitment to the preservation of affordable housing. As our community knows all too well, through communities like Wood Spring Apartments, the well-being of so many people is tied to keeping affordable housing safe, maintained, and, well, affordable. And with that, please give a warm welcome to our keynote speaker, Pam Marsh, Representative Pam.
Gosh, what a wonderful introduction that was to the work and the conversation that you have in front of you over the next few hours. I am so glad to be here with all of you. It's lovely to see many of you who I've met through the legislative process, a couple of colleagues who I am always proud to work with on a daily basis, and the rest of you who are doing yeoman's work in Washington County on these issues that we all share. I thought I would start off this morning just telling you a little bit about what brought me to this space to share your passion for this work. So I was initially elected in 2016. As you heard, I'm from the other part of the state. My district is in southern Jackson County. My hometown is Ashland. The little towns of Talent and Phoenix and the Applegate, a little corner of Medford, also sit in my district. And in the first few years of my work in the legislature, I didn't do a lot in housing. I did do work around manufactured homes because it turned out my district, probably because of our agricultural legacy, had more manufactured homes than any of the other 59 districts across the state. So we set up programs to help residents more easily buy their parks when they go on the market, and to help residents who are living in these very, very old manufactured homes trade up to new, beautiful, energy-efficient homes. But that was about it. And then in 2020, it was really the defining event of the time I've spent in the legislature, and that is in September of 2020, my district was one of those that was affected by the wildfires that coursed across the landscape. When the smoke cleared, we found that of the about 4,000 homes that were lost statewide, 2,300 were in my district, in the little towns of Talent and Phoenix and the unincorporated areas around. And not only were they 2,300 homes lost, but 1,500 of those were those manufactured homes where our most vulnerable residents lived. Our working people, our agricultural workers, our elders were in those manufactured home parks. And so overnight, we had 6,000 people, roughly, with no place to live. And that was on the background of an increased pressure on our homeless population that had really started to generate through the pandemic. You all are aware of that cycle. And so we were desperate, and we looked up at the state to try to figure out what the lessons were, how we would grow back our community, how we would find homes for 6,000 people, how we would help to invest in the redevelopment of housing in those manufactured home parks, because that's the kind of housing that couldn't possibly come back on its own. It was going to require some kind of public investment. And when I looked up, I found out that there were, of course, all of these smart people at the state level already doing really innovative, important work on housing. And as we started down the road on recovery, we realized that many of the lessons that we were learning in wildfire about how to do this work most quickly and most efficiently could also be useful at the state level. So that was it. The die was cast, and I plunged in and have taken every opportunity to work on issues around homelessness and housing since that period of time. If you are an elected official, or if you are working for an elected official, and we know we have a lot of those in this room, you know that homelessness, the lack of housing, is not only a humanitarian issue, it is also a political one. I can almost guarantee, without having confirmed this with you, that every week you get messages from people who are desperate to find housing. And probably every week you get messages from people who are not so sure if they like the housing that's going in on their block or in their neighborhood. Every week you hear from people who are trying to find the last shelter bed in your community for themselves, or maybe from someone they just encountered on the street in front of the grocery store. And every day, you probably hear from people who are wondering why we still have people who are camping in our public spaces, and why the homelessness issue is still something they have to think about on a regular basis. We know that homelessness and housing is at the top or very near the top of every survey of Oregonians around the issues that concern them. We know that these issues affect our workplaces and employers who are trying to attract people to come and then stay in their community. We know that they affect first-time homeowners who are striving to buy a home and can't afford what's on the market. We know it's a tremendous burden for people who are renting, because we see increasingly a larger proportion of the incomes going to simply maintain rent. We know that this is an issue for people who might like to come to Oregon, but look at the housing supply and think twice about that. And we certainly know it's an issue for people who are on the street. And we'll talk about here in a little bit, the lack of affordable housing really driving our homelessness numbers. Now, the good news is, and we can go to the first slide. There was also another slide in there which described this as a mission-driven focus. What we have, the good news, is that we have a governor who has been doing this work around housing and homelessness long since before she was the governor. She really, and we'll talk about this, initiated some of the most innovative home development work that we have done in our communities. We also have a legislature that's doing our best, running in place, trying to keep up with the governor. And most of all, we have communities like yours that are out on the ground, that are really engaging with these issues, because we can do all we want at the state level, and it takes local communities to take policy and funding and pair them together and actually get outcomes on the ground. And that's what you are doing here. But as we talk about this work, I think it is important to just spend a minute or two on the history. How the heck did we get to the point where housing and homelessness are these frontline issues that we find so difficult to grapple with? Well, there's really a century or more of history, and anybody who wants to dive into this, OPB's done some great recaps of what's happened over the last 150 years. But to look at how we created communities that supported our lowest income workers, you'd really want to go back to the 1880s, where you started to have workers coming into mainly Portland, trying to build this new fledgling community, working as longshoremen, working in the timber industry, working as warehouse workers. And the city saw the need and built SROs, single-room occupancy hotels, for those individuals. Over time, those individuals left or became part of the community, went to other housing. SROs became the last recourse for people, for our lower income and very lowest income residents. And then Over the course of 50 or 60 years, we really started, and we'll assume there were good intentions attached to this, to dismantle some of the support systems that we'd put in place in the early part of the century. We had urban renewal, which destroyed and took out many of those SROs that were in downtown Portland and other places. Urban renewal also helped to gentrify neighborhoods, to displace families, to destroy a lot of our naturally occurring affordable housing. We had in the 70s the federal government who retrenched on social and housing supports that had been in place. We've had our psychiatric institutions closed, the poor farms, which had developed in the early part of the century, not wonderful places to be, but a place to be. Those were closed and dismantled. We had war on drugs that caused more family pressures. And still, despite all of this, around the year 2000, even though we'd made many decisions that were not wonderful, you could mostly still find an affordable place to live. So what happened in the last 25 years? Well, it's really, you can track this back to 2007, 2009 when we had the downturn. And it was at that point that we simply stopped developing housing. That was for multiple reasons, lack of capital, the challenges with the workforce. But as we stopped developing housing, we didn't stop growing. And as a result, we've seen this growing pressure on our housing stock. We've also seen a shift of pressures to our rural areas, which is not something we were really seeing 25 years ago, but more and more our rural areas are places where we don't have adequate housing and we do have high rates of homelessness. And so, next slide, thank you. So what's the result? The result is we are looking at a deficit of about 95,000 units statewide, and we are looking at about roughly, according to the most recent point-in-time counts, around 22,000 people who are living on the streets. We've seen an increase in that homeless number between 2017 and 2023 over that pandemic period, but before a pandemic really started, of an increase of about 5,000 people in those homelessness numbers. So we are in a bit of a hole. So let's talk now briefly about some of the things the state has been doing. Many of you are familiar with this work because you've been incorporating our strategies and our funding on the ground, but I think it's helpful to take a quick look back. And so next slide. So we'll start first on the question of homelessness. You know, in 2018 or 2017, when I first came to the legislature, the state was doing very little on the whole issue of homelessness. We had money for EHA, the Emergency Housing Account, and the State Homeless Assistance Program, also known as SHAP. We were handing that money out, but we really weren't doing anything on shelters. If shelters existed in communities, it was because you had a motivated community or a nonprofit, often church-based nonprofits, and you had a community that had a little bit of extra resources to put into this work, but it was not because the state was partnering with you. Then in 2018, Governor Brown put forward a proposal for $5 million to go to shelters. It seems mind-blowing to be putting $5 million into shelters. We also did a shelter study about that time. But the thing that made the difference was very clearly the pandemic. And we have built our shelter system since 2020 through the period today to get to where we are. And I think it's important to understand what a short timeline we've been on and how much work has been done over that period. And it really started with Project Turnkey. You have 3 of those in Washington County. Statewide, we have 32. It was a significant increase to the number of shelter beds across the state. We had investments in navigation centers and more shelters when the speaker was Speaker Kotek. And then in 2023, when Speaker Kotek had become governor, she issued an emergency order because homelessness and housing was the first thing she talked about when she ran for office. And the legislature accommodated and was happy to support that emergency order. And we passed legislation and allocated about $200 million toward housing. A big chunk of that was toward the shelter system and rental supports. And that was in 2023 and enabled us to further expand our shelter system. And then last year in 2025, and we started this work a year ago, we realized we'd built this tremendous shelter system, but our local partners had no idea what to expect of the state because we'd done it opportunistically. When we had money, we'd put it in. We'd funded different things with different expectations. And so we brought a very wise group of people together, and appreciate Jess Larson as participating in this effort from Washington County. And we said, okay, what should our shelter framework look like? What should the state fund? How should we get that money to communities? What expectations should we have? And we put together, for the first time through House Bill 3644, a state shelter framework. So now we know what the state, how the state should participate in shelter. Now, to be clear, the shelter framework is a different discussion than the money that goes into the shelter system. That will still be an ongoing conversation, but for the first time, we actually know, and local governments know, what they should be able to expect from the state, which was a big step forward. So we've done a lot of really important work in homelessness in a very short period of time. Next slide. But here's the thing. We still have another big piece of this. Now, I use this slide a couple times, and my chief of staff page is wonderful, always says, you know, no one is going to be able to read that slide when you show it in the room. And she is, of course, right, but I still love the point being made on the slide. You don't have to see the details to know that my description is on the vertical axis, you have homelessness, or the rate of homelessness. On the horizontal line, starting to the left, you have the poverty rate. And you can see that homelessness, as poverty increases, homelessness isn't particularly affected, may even decline a little bit. In the second chart is drug and alcohol deaths at 100,000, same thing. You don't really see a rise in homelessness, even when you have significant rates of drug and alcohol use. The third slide tells the whole thing. The third slide is median rent. And when median rent goes up, what happens to the rates of homelessness? They accelerate. These slides were provided by the state economist to us a few years ago. The information is a little dated, but I just find it extraordinarily powerful when you have the state economist saying the driving reason you have so many people on the street is because we don't have enough affordable housing. That's a bottom line takeaway, and sometimes a hard thing for people to believe. And so we go to the next slide. And that is, what the heck then are we doing about actually growing our housing supply? Because ultimately, that's what we have to do for housing, our homelessness population, but it's also what we have to do to take care of our first-time home buyers and our renters who are spending too much money and our employers who are looking for people. And so over the last, let's say 10 years, again, with leadership of Speaker Kotek, we have dived into these issues of boosting our housing supply. We could go into a lot of detail, but what I wanted to emphasize on this slide is that building housing production isn't one thing. It actually takes looking at the cycle of producing housing on all the different steps that exist. We've looked at planning and land use. Beginning back in 2017, we passed legislation to require the institution of backyard units, ADUs, in neighborhoods. We built on that and established middle housing programs. We built on that and allowed middle housing land divisions so that middle housing, when it is developed in communities or in existing neighborhoods, can actually be developed as for purchase properties. That work has continued. In this last session, we passed House Bill 2138, which simply furthered this work to make sure that we can make our existing neighborhoods or our new neighborhoods as diverse as possible. Middle housing is a great thing for housing density. I consider it a great thing because of the variety of people, that if you have a variety of units, the diversity that you are able to accommodate within communities to make them, I think, much more rich and enjoyable places to live. We've done work around urban growth boundaries, and this is probably a conversation that will continue. Do we have enough land that is designated as appropriate for urban development? And we had a big conversation about that last year. Again, I think that's a conversation that will continue as we look for ways not to dismantle the land use system, but to make sure that we actually have the supply of land where we need it for developing housing. We've looked at construction innovation. This is a personal passion for me coming from this wildfire impacted area. When we looked around trying to recover from the wildfire, we said, we cannot do this in the conventional way of construction. It just takes too long. So we started looking at manufactured home parks and the use of modulars. And then we realized in order to do those things, we were going to have to invest upstream in the development of the industries. So we actually got some money for St. Vincent de Paul in Lane County to start a nonprofit manufactured home facility. We put money into the development of modular factories and gave 4 existing modular factories around the state some money for further developing their capacity. I just want to pause here and say 3 of those facilities have already produced units that are being used in my community for wildfire recovery, which is pretty darned exciting. Yes, and then this year we set aside some LIFT money so that we can further start showcasing projects that use factory-based components. Let's think differently outside. We've looked at how to stabilize our current housing stock by investing in programs for critical repairs or for HVAC systems that allow people to stay warm in the winter and cool in the summer. We've looked at targeted populations. The governor specifically has called out families and seniors and youth and veterans as being populations she wants to provide for. This year, we went after that senior population and set up, as you heard, a program to provide housing and home modifications for seniors, because we know there's a tsunami of seniors coming our way. And we've looked at new and increased investments. Not so much increased this year. We got about $400 million for LIFT and $100 million for LIFT ownership. Still tremendous investments, not as much as we've been able to do in the past. But we also have to be smart about how we get money in. We've developed a revolving loan fund that we hope, as it gets on the ground, will help counties and cities that see worthy projects in their community that need a little bit of extra support, and that mechanism has a way of recapturing the money and sending it back to the state so that we can invest it over and over again. We've looked at we've set aside a construction guarantee fund. I think there's more conversation to have on this topic of how we structure money in an innovative way. That will still come. So we have been busy at work, and we are starting to see some impacts, less on the number of units, because we're swimming upstream a little bit with the difficulty of obtaining housing for housing investment. But we are really setting the stage, I believe, for when money starts to open up and we can invest in communities. And next slide. So here we are, and we've already talked a little bit about this current reality right now. It's not great. You know, a few years ago, this work was a lot more fun and it felt a little bit more promising. The reality is that we have decreased and reallocated federal investments. You heard something about that. You'll hear from experts in the panel who know more about that than I do. We have a strained state budget. We are not going to be able to make up for the deficit that is coming from the federal government. That is not going to be within our realm. We're going to be working very hard just to keep up with the cuts, especially on the human service side and healthcare, that are going to potentially devastate some of our most vulnerable populations. So we'll make smart strategic decisions, but we are not going to have a lot of additional money to hand to communities. We are seeing sluggish multifamily investment. I think the investment market is quite confused about what's happening right now. And a lot of the multifamily dollars are going to higher end markets like Seattle or San Francisco, where there are people who can compete better than we can at paying rent. So what does all this mean? Well, it's really an imperative, and again, Molly really referred to this in the earlier comments, for strategic, collaborative, and focused action. I think I started with that historical slide because I think it's important to have a long-term understanding of this game. This is a long-term effort. And we will see moments when we are able to do more and moments when we are able to do less. And over time, and we have to have some patience for that, because this is an effort that took a long time to get to. It's a problem that's evolved over years. It's going to take a long time for us to get out, and we are going to have to manage these ebbs and flows that we are experiencing right now. But we have to stay the course. We have to be smarter than ever. The good thing is we really know what to do. We have set the stage in many of the investments that we've done so far. We've thought innovatively. We know what the path forward is. We may have to march in place a little bit before we can enact all of those plans, but we will do that. And I think this is a call for me as a state person to try everything I can to get more decisions made at the local level. That's really what we tried to do in the shelter work, is to empower local communities, because you know your communities much better than I'm ever going to know your communities, and you know where investments need to go and who needs to be helped and who's at the front of the line. So when we have less money, we should make more of the decisions local. I would say, finally, I think there is an opportunity when we have less money to maybe pivot to some decision-making that may position us for the future. I think there's more work that we can do looking at planning timelines at the local level. Many of you are local officials. What can we do? What can we set in place so that as projects start to come, we can get them through more quickly? I think we can continue looking at innovation and how to get units on the ground in ways that we haven't before. That can be not only an advantage from a timing point of view, but over time it will be cheaper as we do that work in greater numbers. We can look at standardizing plans and the provision of housing. We passed something called Oregon Homes, which was an initiative out of the governor's office in this last session, which will allow developers, when we've got it done, to take pre-approved plans from the building division and pair them with pre-approved land use rules that are being developed by LCDC, and with that have an off-the-shelf housing development that they can put right down into communities. That will be mind-breaking when we actually have it in place. And we can have some hard conversations at this time. We may have hard convos about wetlands and how to deal with wetlands. We could have some conversations about land availability, because I don't think we're done with that conversation yet. And it's sensitive and difficult, and this might be a good time to have it. And we can talk about trees, which is probably the hardest conversation of all. But there is work to do, and we will continue on and press on. Although the nature of it will be a little bit different when the resources are a little more retracted. And finally, the last slide. Okay, so this is my house. This is me tomorrow, as long as I get home, and I can dig all the stuff out of the garage if I can find it all. And I put up this slide because it's just a reminder. The work is hard. It is not going to be any easier over the next few years, and yet we will persist and continue on because we know we must. And it is really important every once in a while to, let's say, stop and smell the flowers, or maybe stop and feed the goblins as appropriate, so that we have the heart and the spirit for carrying on. So thank you all so much for having me today.
All right, please join me again in a warm thank you and appreciation for Representative Marsh for making the drive all the way up. And hello again, Nicole Sting with the Department of Housing Services. I'm eager to bring you to our primary event of the program. We have a panel here to discuss and deliberate on a lot of what we just heard from Representative Marsh. So I'll invite panelists to come up to the stage. As we heard from Representative Marsh, there is no doubt that housing was having a moment, or is having a moment, some could argue. Beginning just before 2020, we saw incredible investments begin and continue to grow exponentially from the state legislature. And we saw our communities, the state, leverage one-time funds in a strategic way. In the last decade, we've seen those incredible investments come to life, and we've seen the results of those investments across our community. I'll point to the map to the left there to show just how Washington County has used some of those investments. And yet, now, long-standing programs are at risk. We heard some of that from Representative Marsh. We'll certainly hear more of that from our panel. And at this moment, I'm asking myself, is housing moment coming to an end? I hope not. I'd love to be proved wrong. And it's an important question for us all to ask. How should we navigate this next moment? I'm incredibly honored to be joined by an esteemed panel to discuss this issue. I'll introduce them in a moment. Before I do, I want to acknowledge Maria, who is the Executive Director of Centro Cultural of the Washington County, is not able to join. She's managing an emergency, not unlike what you'll probably hear from the panel today. So with that, first and foremost, I'll introduce Ivory Matthews. Ivory is sitting to the far left. She's the Chief Executive Officer of Home Forward. Ivory also was recently elected the Senior Vice President of the National Association of Housing and Redevelopment Officials. And prior to that, served on their legislative committee and helped advise the Council of Large Public Housing Authorities as a board of director. So Ivory, we're glad to have you. We're also joined by Andrea Bell, who is the Executive Director of OHCS. Andrea, it's great to see you. Andrea is known for her strong advocacy on these issues. She's been with the state and helping us through some of this large growth and is now helping our state navigate the tighter times. Andrea is, as I mentioned, the Executive Director of Oregon Housing and Community Services. That's the State Housing Finance Agency. That's the agency deploying those shelter funds, the modular housing investments, much, much more in recent years. And Andrea also supports and works with the National Council of State Housing Finance Agencies, providing some of that direction and guidance from DC. And last, certainly not least, we're joined by Nathan Teskey. Nathan is the Executive Director of Bienestar. They are a culturally specific developer in Washington County who has been operating and serving the community for decades. They house and support more than 2,500 residents in Washington County alone. Nathan, it's great to have you here. All right, and my first question is really asking for your support to help contextualize what we just heard from Representative Marsh. There are some big moments that have happened in the last 5 years, from Project Turnkey to the creation and increase of investments in the local innovation housing fast track program. Additionally, as was referenced, new regional efforts around shelter and increased shelter investments. So my question for the panel, of the action in recent years from policymakers at the state, federal, local level, what has been most impactful to your organization and the people you serve, and why? And Nathan, we'll go ahead and start with you.
Hello. Can I say one other thing and then answer the question, Nicole?
Absolutely.
It's just because I feel compelled to. I'm sure Maria Rubio is not here because she's dealing with the fact that we have gangs of lawless thugs kidnapping people off the streets of Washington County. And a lot of us are feeling it. Bienestar has felt it. We know for a fact that they are detaining people who are legal immigrants to this country. They are holding them in the detention. We are working with one gentleman who was detained at our property, literally disappeared in the middle of the day, and his coworkers, he was a maintenance worker, did not know he was gone until they discovered his tools left in the parking lot where he was working. We have spoken with him a couple of times, and getting legal access to him is our challenge. The immigration legal system is completely overwhelmed, so people are being held months in detention facilities with no access to legal representation. I have a feeling that's why Maria was unable to make it today. So, sorry about that. For Bienestar, the most impactful policy in the last few years would be the Metro Bond, which I realize is a regional, not a state. And so I think Molly mentioned this at the kickoff, right? It was really a game changer for a lot of organizations, both private and nonprofit-based like Bienestar. We're a community-based affordable housing organization, and so we depend on public support to develop and operate our housing. So the Metro Bond and the way it was rolled out in Hillsborough and Washington County was really a big deal for us. We were able to do 2 really wonderful projects that we're very proud of. One with REACH CDC, I see REACH is in the house, and one with Housing Development Center. And we were also able to participate in some other projects in a lesser way. We're partnering with REACH on 2 other of their projects. We also supported other efforts, including SEPA, which is somewhere in the house as well. So it really opened the doors, and I really hope that regionally in the Portland area, we're able to keep the momentum going. I think organizations like Bienestar, like SEPA, like some of the other organizations that you're familiar with, really were able to up their game and are now poised to do a lot more if there's an ability to continue to develop. And I think if we lose that momentum in a few years, we'll be back down into kind of, what we were like 10 years ago, which was kind of slowly puttering along. Although I think the state funding, I will just also say the state funding, especially LIFT, is very significant. And Representative Marsh mentioned that. I do think the increase there is very meaningful. So that's what I would say. Yeah.
Well, good morning, everybody. First off, let me just say, as a Washington County resident myself, I'm really, really proud to be here. I think over the last several years, as I have, outside of my professional hat, have listened to the conversations and the work that has been happening in this county, it has been incredibly, incredibly exciting and meaningful in so many ways. And so both to all of our elected officials, to all of the leaders, to all of the neighbors, for folks that maybe even came in with a little bit of trepidation around affordable housing and what it means to expand it, I'm really, really grateful. You all have been a really true, steadfast model for what is possible in our state, and so I'm really excited and really immensely grateful. So to the question, I guess let me just offer a couple of things. I think we are all here in the room today not because we agree on every facet of life, I can imagine. I would imagine if you were to survey any one of us on a number of simple or complicated things, we would all answer enormously different and varied. I think that's part of being an Oregonian, is knowing disagreement and difference. But I would imagine that part of why we're united and galvanized in the room here today is because we really, really care about housing, and we know how meaningful and imperative it is for all people. And that whether it's the people of Washington County or folks in Jackson County or folks across the state, I think our perspective, our shared perspective and expectation of what we're working towards is that all people, regardless of what you look like or where you come from, deserve the freedom of knowing that they will have a safe and affordable place to live. Life is hard, it is challenging, it is messy, and nobody should have to go without their fundamental needs met. So I'm appreciative of all of us being here today. In terms of the question itself, I think we saw a really powerful look back at previous versions of our state. I think inherently, because we are talking about the present day and we are talking about the future, what I'm really, really excited for is to think beyond the biennium. So for many of you who receive state funding or interact with state resources, know that a lot of the conversation tends to be circulated around the next 1 year and the next 2 years. That's really important to making sure that we are responsive to the present day, really urgent needs that are here in front of us that people can't wait for. What I'm summoning us to think about is, what does the next half a decade look like for housing for the state of Oregon? As part of that time frame, one of the things, as somebody that came into the agency in 2019, what I will tell you, I think a big part of loving your state is not just singing its praises, but being able to critique it as well. And it was a very different state housing agency in 2019. I'm sure if you were to want more details about that, Nicole was around one at that time. I think what you saw was a housing agency doing some good things. I think you also saw a state housing agency frequently a little bit on the bench, sort of telling you what the lines would be in terms of what skin in the game looks like, what we see our role and responsibility to look like. And I think many of you here in this room, and I think others, have really helped challenge mediocrity in some ways. But I think part of what we're hearing now is there's a whole slew of statistics that help us understand that we're building more today in the last few years than we have in the prior. That we have a more healthy, robust system in so many ways that is helping our economy expand, that's helping to make life better and more affordable for folks. But when I think about the last few years in context to the next few years, What I am hoping that we can do is, regardless of all of the changes, known and unknown, that are coming our way, that we can sort of chart the territory for ourselves in terms of what does the next half a decade for housing look like? What does the future look like that we're fighting for, both in terms of resources, but frankly also re-examining old ways of doing business? The last thing that I'll just say is, oftentimes when we talk about housing, usually the word that travels along with it is crisis. I get that. I think that's appropriate, that is right. And then sometimes when we get into the nuts and bolts of conversation, we then get selecting about what we're unwilling to change or what we're unwilling to look at with fresh eyes while also calling it a crisis. And so I think part of what I'm excited for is for the state, and I think collectively for all of us, is to understand that using that word crisis and understanding the criticality of the issue is going to require us to sort of re-examine and re-look at everything, as opposed to holding things as cemented to be true. So we're not using solutions from the last 5 years or 10 years to help us solve today's issues in a way that is going to be both effective and inclusive.
So, as Andrea was talking, she didn't know that I was going to say this, but I'm going to say it out loud to the group. Last week, Molly and I were in Washington, D.C., and we met with several of our colleagues across the country talking about all of the changes that are occurring, that we're facing with the federal cuts, and trying to figure out how innovative and creative we're all going to be in our local communities. And we had the pleasure of having the National Association of Housing Finance Agencies, their director there, their CEO. And she talked about all of the housing finance agencies throughout the United States, and she gave praise to our leadership here in the state of Oregon. And so she talked about how we had such an amazing leader in Andrea Bell, who brings about creativity, energy, thought leadership, that she plans not just for the people, but with the people. She also expressed how innovative just the state legislature has been in the state of Oregon. And so it made me proud to be an Oregonian. And I know that, as Representative Marsh stated earlier, like, this is an opportunity for us to really be planning for the future. I know the question was for us to highlight, some of the things that have happened. I do my work professionally. Most of my work is in Multnomah County, but I just want to say thank you to Molly for inviting me. I am a resident of Washington County. I live like 15 minutes from this center, me and my husband and my kiddos. And so, but I think we're all in this together regardless of where we reside, in our respective communities. So I want to just give two highlights to some regional measures that have been tremendously impactful to Home Forward, the agency that I work for. And there are two that have already been mentioned throughout this presentation, and that's the Metro Supportive Housing the Metro Supportive Housing Services measure and the Metro Regional Affordable Housing Bond. Both of these have been tremendously beneficial and transformative to housing, our most vulnerable families. And as a result of the Metro Supportive Housing Measure, Home Forward, we've been able to support over 1,000 renters throughout the regional, through the regional term rent assistance program. And we also want to just say thank you to the Metro Affordable Housing Bond, because we've been able to develop over 700 affordable homes throughout our community. Those are some major points of emphasis that I think that, for me, I have had the pleasure of working in the Southeast. I've had the pleasure of working in the Midwest and now in the Pacific Northwest. And I will tell you, having the voters and having you all support these initiatives, that doesn't happen in every community. And I know that you probably already know this, but This is very special for our community to take a voice and to take a stand and really lean into one of the core values that we have at Home Forward is housing is at the core of what we do, and people are the reason that it matters. And it's the people part. And I think that us being able to have those two impactful opportunities really breathes life into how we treat people and the humanity of what we put forth when we think about housing for all in our community.
Thank you. Thank you. And I will echo the appreciation, gratitude for the state legislature, for Andrea and the work of colleagues at Oregon Housing and Community Services. And I'll brag our own horn. We've done really great work here in Washington County in partnership with many of you in the room. So we needed to take a moment to celebrate because there's a lot of risk ahead. And Nathan referenced this, and I think we need to go there. We're 10 months into a new federal administration. We're day 30 of a government shutdown. And there's real threats on our work. There's anti-immigrant discussion, there's anti-housing first discussion and approaches that all threaten the work that we do. So, knowing that threat and having the experience you have had, how is this impacting the community? And what ideas do you have for us as we navigate these impacts? Andrea, you're
All
welcome
right,
to
I'll start. I'll jump right in. So let me start with what we know to be true as of right now. We are amid a government shutdown that at this point does not have an end in sight. Regardless of your perspective on any several things, we know that our federal government shutting down, resources not flowing, is problematic. What we also know is many of the things that we have come to consider as norm, decorum, conduct, resources, what we know is that is in a questionable place right now. I also think that there are other areas that we have considered to be norm that I would imagine many of you and the state and folks across the nation are navigating. So for example, I think for anybody that engages with federal agreements or federal contracts, probably know that language looks a little bit different today than maybe it has in past times. I see a lot of nods. And so I think many of us are having to probably re-examine our relationship to risk, right? Inherently doing a lot of the work we do, accepting federal resources, the building of affordable housing, there's always inherent risk in that. And in this environment, I would imagine that many of us are trying to re-examine our relationship to risk. How do we keep that contract moving to keep resources going for the people that we serve? How do we make sure that we don't inadvertently bring more risks to our community? How do we make sure that we have as much clarity as possible on what is expected of us so that we know what we're signing up for? These are all new areas that we are navigating. What I would say is one of the things that I've been thinking a lot about, and I would say that our agency has been thinking a lot about, is how to divorce what is symbolic and what is operational. So many of us are accustomed to sometimes you might get a press release that's released about something, or you might get a new grant agreement or a contract and you're reading through it and you're trying to understand what's the intent behind some of the words. What we have been trying to go through a practice of, and I won't say that we're perfect at it, but I think we're getting a lot of practice at trying to be as effective at it as possible, and how to divorce what is symbolic, meaning when words are there, and maybe we have a certain perspective about the words, but maybe they aren't asking us to do something. There's not an operational component to it. And then for things that do have operational components to it, how do we approach that with the lens of, one, trying to make sure that we can have as much continuity and services as possible so that we don't have disruption? Where can we, as communities and as a state, hold on to our values while also trying to be as resilient as possible? And I think in many ways, and I think the state is not immune to this, re-examine our relationship to risk. My friends, there is no averting risk, particularly in this environment. And so what I would encourage, and one of the things we are actively engaged in, is also understanding the risk of non-action, understanding the risk that comes with taking everything that we've built up, all of the things that we know make effective good policy, our values of serving all people, of throwing that all by the wayside. What's the risk that comes in that? I also think that one of the other areas that we're thinking a lot about, and I think there's an opportunity for state and local government to do this, is even though there's a lot more information coming our way, I would not assume that we are all informed in the same way. We are just flooded with information and not necessarily more informed. And so where can we help address sort of the disparity of information and facts? To establish sort of a shared sense of truth around what is symbolic and what is operational, what is facts and what isn't fact, and also know that at the end of the day, any version of our world is not always going to be inevitable. The outcomes are not inevitable. And so what I would also encourage, and we're as much in it as you are, is also make sure that the marching orders that we know to be true from the people of Oregon and the people in this community continue to inform the way that we order our steps. We still center racial justice. We are still advancing equity. We still make sure that we are legally compliant. We also still make sure that we have good, effective policy, which means continuing to move the work forward in a way that serves all people. We are still making sure that we are having as much accurate and complete data, because information that we used to rely on to have access to, it's a little harder to come by these days. And so making sure that the things that we've agreed upon as part of our future don't completely wash away. And I think that that is critically important. And I think that those values that we all have and aspire, part of our role and responsibility is to operationalize those values. We have a lovely handouts in front of us, and we all have great words of symbolism, and they fall flat if we do not operationalize our values on a consistent and ongoing basis.
Yeah, I'd like to just kind of piggyback off and then share some other information. So thank you, Andrea, for talking about the re-examining, the risk part of it, right? One of the things that we have seen, and looking at primarily all of the federal documents that we have been receiving in our organization, is realizing that a lot of what we're receiving now is in violation of constitutional rights, is in violation of HUD acts, is in violation of the normal protocols and procedures that Congress had established for any administration to go through before there is rulemaking. So we've been getting these rulemaking responsibilities to sign off on when we haven't been defined. We've been told, if you don't follow these rules, then you will be held liable, right? But we don't know what breaking the rules mean, because the definitions haven't been provided to us. So what we did at Home Forward was we decided to take it a step further, and we decided to enter into litigation. Because we have to stand for something. Now, is that risky? Sure. But is it risky for us not to do anything? Sure. So because I'm not an attorney, that's all I'll share right now. But what I'm sharing with you all is public information. And it's information that me as a representative on the national level, talking to our trade organizations, sitting on their boards, I have communicated until I'm blue in the face, teary-eyed, and everything else. I was on a call 6 o'clock this morning talking to our trade association, saying that these federal dollars, we need these federal dollars, not just in the state of Oregon, but we need them to flow in our community, and they're at jeopardy, okay? And so I'm hopeful. A little birdie has told me that several of our trade organizations are going to join us in this fight for what's right. Irregardless of where our values lie, because we all know that our values are different, but the principle behind the rulemaking processes are unconstitutional. And that's our merit for taking litigation. I want to say also too, there are a couple of things that are at risk right now. As housing authorities, most of us have been awarded what is called emergency housing vouchers. And these were vouchers that came about to housing authorities that were part of dealing with the houselessness that was caused as a result of the pandemic. And so we worked very hard. I know Washington County, those of us at Home Forward worked very hard in making sure that we could use these resources and get these families housed, and not only just get them a key and shelter, but also link the services that they needed to be successful. Well, now we're being told that those funds are sunsetting. So as of November of 2026, we have 400 families on our program that the federal government will no longer fund. 400 families at approximately $8 million. These are families that have already dealt with the harms that our system has caused them for the lack of affordable housing and for whatever accesses that they were unable to access. And so, to me, our goal is to really continue to advocate, not just within the boundaries of our state, but outside of the boundaries of our state, to reach those communities where we have elected officials who don't necessarily agree with the humanity part of housing people who are experiencing homelessness. We also have, one of the other threats that we have is Home Forward. We have 300 mixed status families that are at risk of losing their assistance. And these mixed status families, the federal law allows us to house mixed status families. And we prorate the rent based on the families who are citizens of the United States and eligible to receive that rental assistance. Our mixed status families are some of the families that pay the most rent when we look at the amount of revenue that they contribute to our system. These are hardworking individuals. These are individuals that we will, in Home Forward, in our state, in our community, that we've always welcomed and that we'll continue to fight for. But these are real families that are at risk. So we're talking about 400 emergency housing families and 300 mixed status families. So those are 700 families and thousands of kids in those homes. And so we have also, one last thing, threat, is that for those of us who live, for housing authorities who are in high-cost areas, like Washington County, like Multnomah County, a lot of us are facing what is called shortfall. And shortfall is, because of the cost of our local economy, the amount of rental assistance that we have provided families continues to increase every year. And because that amount of rental assistance that we provide to each family increases, HUD has told us, we have no more money to provide you to continue to keep these families housed. So between the federal government shutting down, between them telling us that we are in shortfall, and at Home Forward, we provide rental assistance to over 18,000 families. So we're at risk right now. Almost every week, we're reaching out to emails when there's nobody there to respond. And we're getting information periodically through people that they might call in for emergency assistance to come in and tell us, okay, well, we're going to pay you half of your rental assistance so that you can pay this money that goes to your landlords in your community. Molly mentioned earlier there's 1,500 landlords in Washington County that are supported through this program, not to mention the impacts of the family. But we also, in Multnomah County, we have over 3,000 landlords who are being supported through this program. So you take these two counties and you just multiply it across our state. That's a tremendous impact of federal resources that we're seeing that are at risk and that we're going to lose in the years to come.
Could you repeat the question?
Absolutely, absolutely. So with the actions of the federal government and certainly, Nathan, wherever is most impactful
Yeah.
to the people you serve, what are you seeing and what advice do you have to navigate?
Okay, yeah, what advice? Well, I would just say that, I think this is an incredibly hard time to be an elected official and to run for elected office. So whether or not I vote for you, I really appreciate people who are running for office because I think it's just a really hard time and a very difficult, situation to navigate. In an earlier iteration of my life, I studied political science a little bit, and I think that there's enough evidence internationally to show that when authoritarian takeovers happen in democratic societies, one of the things that happens is people start to comply and bend the knee, and that would be one piece of advice. Don't do that. Even though, as my colleagues mentioned, there's risk on all sides. I realize that, and you're balancing a lot. But whatever you do, I have a lot of faith in the electeds in our county to really be trying to do the right thing. I may not always agree, we may not agree, but I think everyone I know, at least, I know they're really trying to do the right thing. So I appreciate that. What else can you say? The housing crisis that we have in our state, I don't know if this is answering the question, but it occurs to me. When Representative Marsh put the slide up about housing costs and the correlation with homelessness, I don't know if you all noticed, but the states that were on the bad end of that were Oregon, Washington, California, Hawaii, and New York.
Yep.
Okay? Those are all states that are pretty progressive, that are probably putting way more money into housing than the states that were on the other end of the spectrum. The state of Texas has grown tremendously over the last over the last decade or two, and their housing costs have stayed stable. Okay? Texas, they're going to get a bunch more seats in the next Congress. They're going to get a bunch more votes in the Electoral College. And people are voting with their feet, including from blue states who probably want to stay in progressive areas. And so I really think that's something we need to think about. Why are people moving to Texas? Probably people, some of whose values would be more represented by living in a state like Oregon, because they can't afford the housing. And so I'm all for all the government programs. I'm all for the Metro Bond. I'm all for the supportive housing measure. And I certainly agree with what was said about the federal resources. And it's not going to be enough. It is not going to be enough. And so when we talk about some of the reforms that I think Representative Marsh was talking about and others are talking about, I think we really need to move. I really think that, some of even I was on one of the, I'm babbling, I realize. I was on one of the advisory committees for the Department of Land and Conservation Development. They're awesome people, they're great. It's slow. Can we move faster? There's like rulemaking, and then we're going to go through process, and I'm for the rule of law. I'm for the rule of law. Okay, so I think it's important to have that. But it is possible to create systems that create a lot more housing within the rule of law context, but with simpler, easier rules, right? And I will just say, last week I was at an event with the Welcome Home Coalition. Benistar is a proud member of the Welcome Home Coalition. And there was a very interesting survey that study that they conducted that found that they surveyed homeless people, I think mostly in Multnomah County. I could be wrong about that, but 91% of the folks they surveyed expressed that they wanted an apartment. Like, where did they want? You know, because sometimes there's this stereotype, now they just want to be on the streets, they want to stay homeless and so on. So that's not true, okay? So to have an apartment, there have to be apartments, right? And I think it's true, you can fact check me later on this, I think it's true that the Portland Metro region has one of the worst, if not the worst ratio of number of dwelling units to households, right? So that means like, how many dwelling units are there per household that's looking for housing? I think we have the worst, at least in the metro region. Okay, so I'm an affordable housing developer. I'm all for the Metro Bond. I'm all for support of programs like that would allow me to build more housing that's affordable. But we have to address the fact that market rate housing is not happening fast enough. And the governor's goal, I think, of 36,000 units a year, like, we're falling pretty far short. There are, of course, circumstances and reasons for that we can't control, the larger economy, interest rates, financing that Representative Morse mentioned. But there are some things we can do, and we're not doing as much as fast as we probably should be. So,
Can I add one more thing? So just want to piggyback off of what Representative Marsh said. One of the things that we've been doing, and this is kind of like a ripple of hope, and that's like talking to our funders at various levels of government about how we are going to intentionally and strategically align our resources for collective impact, because we got some very tough decisions to make moving forward. And, you know, the financial picture presents itself in a way that we're not going to be able to financially support all of the things that we have supported now or have supported in the past, but how do we align what we have in front of us for the most collective impact? And then also having a very collective comms approach around that, so that our voters, our community know exactly the decision-making process that we're having to make.
Absolutely. Well, I appreciate all of that. And I also want to acknowledge we have folks in this room that work in various parts of the housing continuum, from case managers to executive directors of homeless service nonprofits to developers, folks that work in the construction industry. I'm sure you all have questions for this panel as you and your organization are wrestling through how to navigate these changing impacts. Martin is over there with the mic. If you want to wave, Martin. If you have any questions, please raise your hand. I see our chair front and center with a question.
I'm just going to prime the pump. You are our leaders. Nathan, I've gotten to see you in action for years now and change the face of our community and improve it each and every day. Andrea, you're awesome. Thank you for leading a tremendous state organization that has been a partner with all of us. Housing authorities, CBOs, Washington County, you name it. Thank you for really transforming the agency, as you've spoken about. Ivory, thank you for being a tremendous partner to us here in Washington County, but in the region, and for your leadership across the country as well. The last question you received was about the harsh realities that we face today. As I listened to your answer to that question and the previous one, and what you talked about in rethinking how we do our work with risk, I am reminded that you are leaders, and that here, our room is full of other leaders, but also warriors. So, yeah, as they highlighted, we have really crappy conditions today. I'll just characterize it as that. As our leaders, before your warriors. How do you want us today to have our wells of energy replenished so that we, each of these people here, will continue to persevere and do the love and spread the love? As Jess Larson said to me earlier today, we're loving on the people here today who love the people each and every day, all of our peoples. So what is that word of inspiration that you would like our community members here today to take away? Just ponder that for a moment. Nathan, you can go last.
One word? One word,
Oh, it
Catherine?
could be, it could be a phrase, it can be whatever, but I refuse to give up.
Good.
Right?
Good. Yeah, we all should.
Right, exactly.
Yeah. Yeah. Emergency. That's my word.
So you want me to respond to the emergency?
Yeah. And thank you for that presentation. I would have sort of thought it's the other way around, like we're the warriors and you're the leaders, but anyway, yeah, we can all be warriors and leaders, I guess. I mean, look, I do think probably a lot of us are exhausted. We went through the pandemic. We've been through the housing crisis now. We had the wildfires that affect communities, other crises. So it is exhausting, and I think we're seeing a lot of that. But I think fate has put us in this place where we're really in an emergency for the country. And obviously, we have our unique challenges in Oregon. I mentioned the ones that are top of mind for me. But there is a larger emergency to our whole society that's under threat. It's just kind of obvious. And, maybe since I don't work for a government agency, I feel like I can speak a little more bluntly, maybe than some people feel comfortable doing. But I mean, yeah, so I don't know always in every particular case what we should do or what you should do, Catherine, and sometimes there will be hard calls, so I get that too, but I do think that an emergency is being forced upon us, and we need to figure out how to respond to it. That's how I put it. So, yeah.
I think anybody that knows me knows I'm not a one-word answer type of person. But here's maybe two or three things I'll say is part of what I think is slightly unfolding right now, or maybe more than slightly, is I think a broader questioning of government. And what I would say, one of the things that we have here in Oregon, and something that you can rely on of all of the things that maybe feel less reliable these days, is that we still have a vigorous government that is centered in humanity. You still have a leader of this state, and our governor, that cares deeply about the present and the future of everyday people. She will be relentless to that. You will have a set of government agencies that will show you the best of what a vigorous, active government can be like. I would say the other part of it is the local jurisdictions are going to be our salvation in so many ways. I expect that. You will have one of the most important, challenging, and extremely difficult roles. And part of where I think a good, vigorous, effective government can do is figure out how to best support you, including when that means we need to move out of the way, including making sure that we are clearing the way of any roadblocks that you all need, including if that roadblock is us. That also might mean your vigorous agency also challenging you so that we, in this moment, can be as best responsive to the needs of everyday people. Think about the conversations we'll be having in the next few years for families and children that are living in today, such as the families and children that lived through the pandemic, that lived through the wildfire. There will be young children whose future will be shaped by these moments. And I think it's a really, really important moment to remind people of government at its best, what it can look like and what it can feel like. And I still believe in that. And I think Washington County is really well positioned for that. The last thing that I will just say is, I think the fact that we're in this room today, I think is a reminder that we are so much more united than all the things that could divide us. Be willing to be wrong about people. Be willing to have conversations with people, even if they say things that irk you or you think that you know everything about them. Be willing to be wrong about people. I live in a pretty small community where I am not particularly discreet just by way of how I look. People can see me from a mile away, and there's not a whole different versions of me in my community, is what I'll say. And one of my community members picks up trash all of the time, and whenever I see her, she's picking up trash. She's figured out my job, and so she usually will pick out the paper and tell me all the things happening in Washington County, and she'll ask me, is this the governor, or is this you doing this, or who's doing this? And there's lines and maps drawn all around it, trying to make it all make sense. And one of the things that she told me recently is, she was telling me about her relationship to voting and her relationship to politics, and I let her blather on. And anyway, I think at the close of that conversation, she had told me that she had been in this community forever. She goes, I don't travel much. This is my home. I'll never leave it. I'm never going anywhere. She says, I have a lot of thoughts about homelessness, but I can't imagine what it would be to try to tackle life if I didn't have a place to live. I could not imagine. I can't even fathom that. And so what I would just say is, we'll come to the issue from all different types of angles. We don't need to tackle all the big things of life. Housing is a really good place to start. And maybe it can start with just everyday conversations of people in your community, and be willing to be wrong about people, because we'll need each other to get to the solutions I think we're all trying to get to.
When I think about, thank you for asking this question, but when I think about it, I go back to what's etched in my DNA, and that is, I am a person who grew up housing insecure in rural South Carolina. I am a person who mother had me at the age of 15, and by the time she was 22 years old, she had 5 kids. I am the first generation of high school graduate and college graduate. And I think about all of the things that my mother went through and all of the things that we experienced in life. When people told us we could not be, we would not be, and would never be. But then I think about that sprinkle of hope of people like the people that's in this room today, who continue to stay mobilized, who continue to delve into their core values of humanity, who understand how to deal with people who had gone through and experienced trauma. And I say to you in this room today, we gotta stay mobilized. We gotta continue to know that you give hope and inspiration to the next generation of people who are gonna be sitting in these positions, in your position as elected officials, as community leaders, as people who are doing the work on the front line. We gotta do it for them. They depend on us. And for me, I'm not giving up. And I'm going to fight until the very end, until I have no more breath to breathe on this earth. And so I ask you today, continue to be allies with us in this work. Continue to elevate the stories and to continue to keep humanity at the forefront. Thank you.
Thank you. We have time for one more audience question. I see lots of hands. I'm going to play deference to our elected officials. Mayor Beatty, if you'd like to ask a question.
Nathan, you said something at the start about authoritarian takeover and about armed thugs kidnapping people off the street, and then I'm sure out of politeness said, "I'm sorry." I think I would encourage you to not say sorry. Everything you're saying is true, and people are on our streets doing horrible things to our community members. So I stand with you in your sentiment, and our local governments are working to respond to the ever-growing crisis, right? Since I've been mayor, we've had a global pandemic, we've had a historic heat dome. My city is not one to shy away from issues. We were the first in the state to lead Sanctuary City Resolution, first to enact an eviction moratorium. So we stand ready to do whatever we need to do in this moment. And so I want to just say that, and everything you said and the panel said is absolutely
I
true.
retract my apology.
Thank you. I normally only have to say that to women, so I'm glad I got to say that to you today. I do want to go back to kind of what it's yes and. We're responding to this unnecessary crisis that the current inhabitant of the White House is inflicting upon us, and local governments still have to do housing and all the other things. And so I do want to also share your sentiment about things taking way too damn long, and local government would agree. And part of, and I'm sorry to our state lawmakers here, I'm no stranger in Salem when I'm talking about housing and what cities need. What often I find as a city level of government is we go to Salem and say, here's what we need to make housing, and they go, yeah, I don't think so. Here's what you really need. Here's this revolving loan fund that the majority of us said we can't actually use unless you tweak it this way. No, we think you could do it. So how do we in local government and people doing the work advocate to Salem to listen to the governments that are doing the work? And I think that to me is, I could have a whole TED talk on that series, but we need help and we need to go in partnership. And so I'm open to any ideas you have. I don't know in this if I'm the warrior or the leader, but happy to play either role.
Can we respond? Yeah. I mean, I agree with you. There are some sacred cows that perhaps we have to think about. Representative March mentioned the urban growth boundary. I have friends in Multnomah County who are very, and who I adore, who are very excited about social housing and models from Europe. If you look at pictures from those cities in Europe, they allow 8, 10-story apartment buildings, okay? So we have a social housing network already. I'm doing social housing, so we have social housing. What we don't have is zoning that allows 8 and 10-story buildings. And small units, and so there's a lot that we can't just obviously replicate that. So what I would just say is 91% of the people polled by Welcome Home said they want an apartment. So I think that's clear. So the myth that they don't want housing is the people who are homeless, that's not true. But we have to have the apartments, and in the United States, we have to acknowledge that that's going to include a lot of market rate developers. I'm not a market rate developer. I want money to do affordable housing, and REACH wants it, and SEPA wants it, and Home Forward, and Washington County. But that's not going to be the only answer. And we have to just grapple with the fact that, like I said, people are moving to Texas, and we have the lowest ratio of dwelling units per household, I think. I could be slightly wrong about that, but it's pretty close. And so that's a crisis. And when we say it's a crisis, I mean, I'm just venting, right? And people say well, but my commute's going to be longer, or I won't have as much sunshine. Okay, that's bad. I get that. But people are dying on the streets. So what's the relative trade-off there? So anyway, I agree with you, Mayor Beatty, that in this moment of sort of national crisis, that we can't lose our sight, lose the ball in terms of local governance too. So I think that's really good. Thanks.
Thanks. Well, I think I expected a 3-panel response, so I will sneak in one more audience question. Your hand shot up the fastest, right there.
Nicole, can I just really quickly just make one
Please
statement?
do.
You had your hand up, so I promise I will not jump in front of you. But I do want to reemphasize an important sentiment of what the mayor mentioned, at least what I heard from it, which is listening, which is not having a presupposed idea about what someone needs. And when they say that they have an issue, believe and trust the issue as they name it. So I just want to re-echo that out loud, because I would say that one, that is something that as a state that we've had to wrestle with. I think that we've had to continue to wrestle with, and so I want to just name that out loud, because I don't think that that's situational. I think that's more broadly the reality and the relationship between government and what it means in partnership in terms of listening. So I appreciate that, Mayor.
City Councilor with the City of Banks. I want your personal opinions on, if Oregon's death rate exceeds its birth rate, why are we still seeing rising homelessness, ongoing housing construction, and persistent housing challenges?
Can I hear the first part of the question? My apologies.
I was at a conference recently that said that Oregon's death rate now exceeds our birth rate. And so I'm trying to connect the correlation between all of our housing needs and challenges and homelessness if we are losing more people than we are gaining.
I mean, I think there's a time lag thing going on here, right? I think the statistic you're mentioning is a fairly recent phenomenon, and we also had people moving into the state at a higher rate than moving out, and so there was population growth. I could be wrong, but I think we're now being projected to decrease, to your point, right? But I still think there's a time lag in the housing market. If we keep losing population for the next 10 years, yeah, housing will get cheaper, but like, is that what we want to do? So I think probably partly the answer is there's just a little bit of a time lag, right? Like if that trend continues that you're describing, eventually housing will get cheaper because there will be fewer people, and houses last longer than that takes. So.
Yeah, I appreciate that. I think the statistic that you're referencing, and I'd be curious to see it, I think that sounds like data over the last couple of years, so more recently, and you can correct me if I'm wrong in that. I think one of the things that I'm taking from it is we did a State of the State housing report recently, and within that report, it looked at not only the number of units and the types of units that we need across the state. It also talked about the relationship between population inflow and outflow that we've seen over the last few years that has sort of compressed and compounded our housing market across the board. One of the things that it also talked more about, and I think there's a whole lot of broad discussion that needs to happen between the relationship between housing stock and our economy, and the relationship between quality of life and health impacts over the next few years, what that means. So we've often talked about the relationship between health and housing and quality of life and all of the different interplays that happen with it. All to say, I think part of the reason that housing is one of the, not becoming, but I think is one of the key domestic policy issues of our country is because so much centers around it, both in terms of quality of life, but also I think the impact, part of what that statistic I think also seeks to get to is if there are not effective interventions related to homelessness that can help connect people to housing, there is a reality and impact in that, and often a big part of that, it feels morbid, and I think it's important to say out loud, which is loss of life as well.
Great, thank you. And I will take the privilege of moderator to ask a final question. We've talked quite a bit about the harsh realities we're facing. Nathan, I want to appreciate you for bringing in the experience of Be Star and what you're seeing with your employees and your residents. We're seeing in the news, we're watching what's happening, and we're devastated for what folks are going through. Andrea, you spoke beautifully to what I've heard you speak about before, government risk and who takes the risk. And Ivy, you've offered so many insights about what's happening in DC and the impact to Washington County, to the community that you serve in Multnomah County. What I'm wondering for the folks in this room, what do you need from us? What is your call to action to the leaders in this room for how we navigate this together?
For me, stay engaged. Continue to stay engaged, continue to stay informed, attend the public meetings, provide the public comments. We're going to be making some very important decisions in the future, and it's so important that we make those decisions not just from our lens, but we make those decisions based off of what we've heard from our community. And so I just would say stay engaged.
I wish I had one, Nicole, I'm sorry. So I would say three things. One, tend to collecting data and information for your community. Tend to that. Make sure that you are collecting data, disaggregated data about your community, about what's happening in your community as a factual point, not as a one of commentary. I think we are seeing some really interesting trends in not only less data being available, but also when the data has represented, it has looked very askewed from the data that we have collected, and that when we cross-compare it, it looks very different. It is really important because a lot of times the federal government uses their data sources to drive resources. So collect your own data resources, tend to that like you haven't been before. I think that's thing one. Second thing, I think anything that you can do to help continue to, not that you're not doing, help people make sense of what is happening. I think oftentimes in these really sort of challenging, complicated matters, there can be a caution to, and it's important caution to how we frame things and what should we say publicly. The more that you can help residents make sense of it and locate what it is, the better. I think there's a lot of folks that want to be engaged and want to figure out how to support and help, and there is so much that is coming at folks, so the more that you can help offer a shared sense of truth and facts to point people to, I think the better. I would say the last thing that you say, and I will just continue to say this, name what you need and be specific. Name what you need. Name what you need from your state government. Name what you need from your federal government. Yes, the federal shutdown is there. There are people that are still there. They are still there. They are still working. And we know because we meet with them. So they are still there. So I would say if you're sending emails and getting bounce back, continue to send them because folks are still working and still there. Continue to name what you need from your state government. And that doesn't include just sort of the normal fiscal related things. We're happy to hear those too. More money is always good. We get that. But also as you're wrestling with local decisions, use us as a partner and resource, I think, to think through that. We are have our own governance set up to be able to do that, particularly with local jurisdictions. So name what you need and don't be shy about it.
I don't get a chance to talk to a room with this many elected officials, so I'll say, for the housing crisis, I would say in a progressive county and state like Oregon, we focus a lot on demand side solutions, like let's do a rent assistance program, let's do a Metro bond. I'm all for those things. I really urge us all to think about the supply side. If we could get a virtuous cycle where we're creating more housing, programs like the Supportive Housing Services measure would have a greater impact. I've mentioned the cost, I think, of the vouchers in Multnomah County. That's not just like a fixed state of nature kind of thing. That's a choice that we're creating over time with how we allow housing to be built. If we could get the rents down, those wonderful ARLA vouchers that we have could go further. And so I would say supply. Thank you.
Appreciate that. More advice from folks in the room, and we'll certainly have that at the end of the program. We encourage you to stick around and connect with one another. But we have one more item to get to, and before we do, I'd ask for that you join me in another round of applause for this panel. Thank you. And as our panel takes their seats, we'll invite up Chair Harrington for our final moment. In these hard moments, what brings me hope is the people that we're doing this work with. I'm honored to be working in collaboration with Chair Harrington and the Board of County Commissioners. We're really lucky here in Washington County. We have incredible leadership that is dedicated to solutions and has been part of the solution. And yet we know government is not the only part of the solution. Chair Harrington will be announcing our inaugural Community Cares Award, recognizing a member of our community that has been a champion of this work and is creating housing solutions for all. So Chair Harrington, please come on up.
Thank you, Nicole, and thank you to each and every one of you for being here today, for doing your part, for continuing to challenge me and my colleagues on the Board of Commissioners to keep doing our best every day that we can for as long as we can. What a great forum we've had, and so many people have worked hard to put this together for us. As Molly Rogers said, this is our third large housing forum. We used to have this housing forum just as the two Washington County committees and the board to advance our work with affordable housing and supportive care in our community. We've come a long way, and I'm grateful to have the colleagues that I have on the current Washington County Board of Commissioners dedicated to this space. And it hasn't always been this way, and it's up to you as voters to ensure that we continue a positive path moving forward. As I believe each of you know and operationalize each and every day, as Andrea used that word, shelter is a human right. And yes, I believe, and I know my colleagues believe, that every Washington County resident has a right to a safe and affordable home. If this forum is another vehicle to figure out how we can better achieve that goal, then count me and my colleagues in as one of this forum's greatest backers. I'm grateful for each and every one of you, but including our staff that helped make this forum great today and the work that they do each and every day. Which brings me to this, my favorite part of today's forum, but I am a little bit biased. As Nicole introed, I'm excited to announce for the first time Washington County's Housing Forum, in our Housing Forum history, the Community Cares Award. The Community Cares Award is presented to an individual here in our community who've had a positive influence and impact on our community. The county wants to acknowledge staff, leaders, and volunteers from all of our member organizations who have modeled our values and who have cared, literally cared, for the people of our community. These are individuals and organizations whose everyday work towards a better Washington County where everyone has an affordable home with the supports and opportunities that each of us need at different times in our life. And so the Community Cares Award recipient is an advocate for our community, creating housing stability and prosperity for those who serve. For the inaugural award, our process here has been that advisory board members from the Housing Advisory Committee and our Homeless Solutions Advisory Council submitted nominations for this award. Then the chairs and co-chairs of these committees and our Department of Housing Director, Molly Rogers, had the impossible job of reviewing applications and selecting our very first Community Cares Award winner. As you might suspect, it was a tough competition. You're each doing awesome work. Many nominees for this award are right here in this room. And to each of you, first and foremost, thank you very much for the work that you do to serve our Washington County community and our adjacent communities. I am so touched by your work and motivated each day to continue to do my part and play my role in leading, but also in supporting your work. And so I'm very honored to serve you and to be here today. Before I announce the winner, I'd like to acknowledge each of our nominees. Each one of them, and all of them collectively, have very impressive backgrounds and impeccable values. So, as I call your name, please do stand to be recognized. Catalina Luna, a career coach with the Immigrant and Refugee Community Organization. Amanda Turpening, an outreach manager at Project Homeless Connect. Carol Greenhour, a board member and volunteer with Family Promise of Tualatin Valley. Ellie Smith, a housing placement specialist with Open Door Housing Works. Ken Bello, a senior project manager with LMC Construction. Cameron Murphy, yes, a lead housing liaison with Boys and Girls Aid. She and I have spent a year plus in meetings together, and today is the first time that we've met face to face. We're so used to seeing one another in the electronic Jeopardy boxes and many Zoom meetings. Gustavo Martinez, thank you, an operations manager with Bienestar. Charlie Davis, a street outreach coordinator with the Forest Grove Foundation. And last of our nominees, Adam Harvey, a director with the Washington County Hope Center. Thank you to each of you individually for your care and for being part of our very caring Washington County community. I want to read a statement from the nomination of our winner before we start with our drum roll. This person values dignity, connection, and the power of lived experience. Their work reflects a deep belief that every person deserves to be seen, heard, and supported, no matter their circumstances. Above all, they value relationships, building trust, honoring resilience, and helping others reclaim their stories with strength and hope. And the moment we've all been waiting for, drum roll please. The winner is our first ever Community Cares Award, Ellie Smith, Housing Placement Specialist with Open Door Housing Works. Ellie, come on up. Ellie is recognized for being relentlessly resourceful in serving her clients and advocating for a stronger safety net system in our community. Housing is fundamental to our well-being, and Ellie, you know it, big time. So please join me in thanking Ellie, our first ever award recipient. Would you like to say some words?
Thank you. I really appreciate this. I'm deeply honored to receive this Community Cares Award. The work is personal to me. I'm rooted in my own lived experiences and deep connection to the people I serve. Over the past decade in Washington County, I have had the privilege of working as a parent mentor, supporting individuals on the opiate caseload, and serving as a housing case manager at Open Door. Through this journey, I've learned the power of truly listening and seeing and responding to needs that aren't always visible. I don't just provide services, I build relationships. I connect with people on a deeper level, which allows me to show up with empathy, creativity, and care. I believe every person deserves to be seen, heard, and supported in a way that honors their story. This work is more than a job. This work is more than a job. It's a reflection of who I am and what I believe in. I'm grateful to be a part of the community that shares the vision and that lifts others. Thank you.
So as you continue in this work, so that you have a memento to help you through even the toughest parts, here we have a little award, physical award for you in this work.
I appreciate it.
Thank
you. So
you.
much.
Thank you, Ellie, for all that you do and continue to do here in our community, and it's been a real honor to recognize you for all of that. And at this juncture, I would like to welcome back up to the podium our great Molly Rogers, who does incredible work, dedicated work to help our residents and our community members each and every day with today's forum closing remarks. Molly.
Congratulations, Ellie, our first inaugural Community Cares awardee. You may or may not know this, but part of my career trajectory, I spent a lot of time at Open Door 25 years ago, where I got to see, first and foremost, how you all showed up, provided meals and showers for people who are coming in from the camps. Thank you. Chair Harrington, you're really our first de facto Community Cares champion. So I just wanted to thank you for all of your support throughout these years. Big thank you and gratitude to our incredible keynote speaker, Representative Pam Marsh. We see you showing up every day in Salem, providing our leadership. And it's been such an honor to see our panelists really grapple with some challenging guidance and reflections on how we are to be here today, and just reflect. What I'm hearing is, let's admit to be wrong a little bit more, myself included. We're here to be seen, we're here to see you, we're here to hear, and we're here to support. Thank you to Andrea Bell, Ivory Matthews, and Nathan Teskey for saying all that you've done. My deepest gratitude for your time today. But last but not least, a heartfelt thanks really to our planning team. Okay, so this is your time to stand up, everyone. BNF, Emily, Hamid, Martin, Meredith, Nadia, Nicole, Nikki, Kat, and Brittany. Please stand up. Without you, none of this could have happened. This was months and months and months in the planning, in fact, likely years. Please join me in thanking our housing services team today. I have the dream team here. Thank you very much, everyone. Oh, before you leave, I do want to express you need to take home an annual report. It really is the first time we've pulled together accomplishments from both our Housing Authority and our Department of Housing Services into one beautiful program, and take home with you the federal impacts and what you've shared, and please spread the word. Thank you so much.